Tonight, international flights from Hobart Airport resume, a boost for Tasmania's embattled tourism industry. Hello, I'm Lucy Shannon. This is ABC News. Also tonight, a new government in Queensland. The Liberal National Party rises to power for the first time in a decade. Iran assesses the damage after retaliatory attacks from Israel as world leaders urge de-escalation. And Australia's protection of great white sharks questioned after a spate of attacks last summer. Tasmania's direct link to New Zealand is once again active, with international flights resuming at Hobart Airport today. It's good news for the state's tourism, with thousands of seats available over the summer. But with Labor continuing to call foul over the bungled Spirit of Tasmania vessels rollout, not everyone's feeling upbeat about the sector.
A sweet welcome for our friends across the ditch. Hobart Airport today celebrating the return of direct flights with New Zealand after they were paused back in April.
So good.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's wicked.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Actually, very convenient.
The seasonal service will provide 24,000 international seats over the next 5 months, something the Tourism Council hopes will be a shot in the arm for the sector.
Our message is support the service. That cannot be underestimated. That type of increased capacity over the summer months is really important.
Year on year we're seeing stronger demand, which is fantastic, and particularly from our North American market, where we're seeing traffic grow upwards of 10% year on year, season on season.
Welcome.
The government welcoming the resumption of the service.
This is going to be a great celebration for our state, a real boost for our tourism sector.
The return of the flights is good news for the tourism sector, coming at the end of a week where it was dealt a huge blow. Small operators are still dealing with the news that they'll have to make it through at least 2 more years before the new, larger Spirit of Tasmania ferries come into service.
We had 75 vans in this weekend in 2018. This weekend now, we only had 24 vans in. That is dismal. They have the capacity there. They only need to run it more.
While the government says there'll be extra Spirit of Tasmania sailings in line with demand, the state opposition says they should be guaranteed.
This is not about profit and loss for TT Line, it's about profit and loss for our tourism industry that is screaming for help.
We as a government are about providing the solutions to make sure that we get these two spirits working as quickly as possible.
Solutions sorely needed. Meg Whitfield, ABC News.
Queenslanders have voted for change in an election for the history books. The LNP will form government in Queensland for the first time in nearly a decade. David Crisafulli is set to become Queensland's 41st Premier, vowing to deliver on his promises and already eyeing off a second term. Despite Labor's defeat, Stephen Miles says he has no regrets and wants to continue on as leader if the party will have him.
We've got a job to do.
A light gym workout before Queensland's Premier-elect got down to business.
So we're off to work.
So were these shredding trucks, pulling into government headquarters ahead of the changing of the guard. The LNP's victory, ending Labor's nearly 10-year reign, still sinking in.
In historic terms, I said it was like climbing a mountain. Well, it was like climbing a mountain weighed down with a backpack and in the sleeting snow.
Congratulations coming from Canberra.
Not only did I speak with the Prime Minister, he was good enough to afford me about 20 minutes this morning.
It was a jubilant night for the LNP, nerves turning to elation as seats turned blue. He reiterated his mandate: youth crime, health, housing and cost of living, and promised to work for all.
To the people of this great state, I've lived and I've worked at both ends of it, and I love every inch of it.
Stephen Miles had already addressed the party faithful.
If you consider what we were up against, this is an extraordinary result.
But this was no concession speech.
It is clear that that hasn't been enough to secure a majority of seats for Labor, and also that the LNP is unlikely to have a majority.
In the light of day, Stephen Miles had reassessed as he surveyed the damage in the regions. The post-mortem is underway.
Our team will need to do the work of reconnecting with Queenslanders, particularly regional Queenslanders.
Mr Miles keen to be opposition leader.
I'm not taking anything for granted, and I will let our caucus members decide who leads them.
There's plenty of soul-searching for the Greens, which has failed to make any gains.
Stephen Miles managed to recover some vote, and he managed to hold us off in some of those inner city seats by picking up our policies and directly offering them to Queenslanders.
The outgoing Premier acknowledging it's been a hard-fought campaign.
I'm sure you'll all understand my desire to get to the pub.
Kate McKenna, ABC News, Brisbane.
Federal Labor is playing down any hard lessons from the defeat in Queensland, even pointing to positives in its political battle with the Greens. The Coalition is celebrating the win, even if the state LNP doesn't support its key nuclear power policy.
A warm reception for Anthony Albanese, shaking hands and shooting selfies at the Norton Street Italian Festa in Sydney.
Good on you. Thank you so much.
Enjoying the embrace of some loyal supporters after a bruising night for Labor up north.
The outcome was much better for Queensland Labor than what was anticipated just weeks ago, let alone months ago.
Federal Labor insists the loss wasn't as brutal as it might have been, putting it down to an it's time factor and concerns over law and order. And it sees green shoots appearing where the Greens' vote is falling. The party's vote drops steeply in parts of inner Brisbane.
There's a big message in this result for Adam Bandt.
These people are extremists and they're being found out for what it is. And so I think there's a big message there.
The Coalition is similarly thrilled with the Greens' struggles, but it's again facing questions over its nuclear policy and how that fits with an LNP government opposed to nuclear power.
The fact that we've got rid of Stephen Miles means that we'll be able to have that sensible conversation in a constructive way.
The Federal Coalition wants to build 7 nuclear reactors on the sites of existing coal-fired power plants around the country. 2 are in Queensland. David Littleproud argues if the Coalition wins office, the states, including Queensland, will have to fall into line.
We have to set an energy grid for the East Coast and South Australia and Tasmania, and we need all the states, no matter their political persuasions, to respect the decision of the Australian people.
The Queensland election delivered lessons across the federal political spectrum. Labor might argue it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but results in the regions will give it plenty to worry about. The Coalition can claim a win, but there's no endorsement of its key nuclear policy. And the Greens have to wonder if playing hard politics in Canberra is paying off. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Australia has joined the United States in voicing its hope that Israeli airstrikes on Iran will be the end of retaliatory attacks between the two countries. Israel says that its bombing was precise and targeted at military sites, and Iran claims there was only limited damage, but said 4 of its soldiers were killed.
In the early hours of Saturday morning, 100 Israeli fighter jets set out on their mission. Israel says it hit 20 missile manufacturing and military sites across the country, some near the capital, Tehran. The mission codenamed Days of Repentance, following a barrage of Iranian missiles fired at Israel earlier this month. Its closest ally, the United States, was given a heads up.
It looks like they didn't hit anything other than military targets. My hope is this is the end.
Images posted on social media show emergency crews at this building. Iran playing down the damage from the strikes, but confirming 4 soldiers were killed. Israel is insisting the targets were chosen in line with its national interest and not because of pressure from Washington, as implied by the White House. In Tel Aviv, some Israelis believe the strikes were justified.
It was a good action, but we need to keep it calm. We don't need to get the escalation going.
We need to respond very hard, very quick.
Australia is in lockstep with the US, urging Tehran not to hit back again.
Israel, of course, has a right to retaliate for the attacks that took place from Iran. What I do is join with the US Secretary of State, join with Prime Minister Starmer to continue to work towards a de-escalation in the Middle East.
How Iran responds from here is being watched closely around the world. State media is reporting the country's foreign minister is saying there are no limits as to how far Iran will go to defend itself. The calculation from here is strike back and risk further escalation with Israel, or hold fire and deal with Israel's belief that it's secured a strategic win. And just hours after the strike, proof Israel is refusing to let up in its attacks against Hezbollah. The IDF releasing vision of a massive strike in southern Lebanon on what it claims was an underground compound. The explosion so large it triggered earthquake warnings across Lebanon and northern Israel.
And Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran is in Jerusalem and explains what we can take from the timing of the strikes.
The US had been in Israel's ear for some time, urging it in any strike on Iran to focus on military targets rather than the country's nuclear facilities. And that is what Israel has done just 10 days out from the US presidential election. This is a poll which will have a significant influence on the multiple conflicts happening in the Middle East. Donald Trump, for example, is expected to take a far harder line on the issue of Iran than Joe Biden and his would-be successor, Kamala Harris, potentially giving Israel a little bit more leeway if it decided to attack Iran again in the future. These strikes have also come just ahead of the expected restarting of ceasefire and hostage talks in Gaza. These are talks which will be the first since the killing of the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar at the hands of Israel just over a week ago. However, it is not clear whether either side will be prepared to negotiate.
Russian strikes in the Ukrainian cities of Dnipro and the capital Kyiv have killed 7 people. The attacks damaged multiple buildings in Dnipro, including a hospital where more than 20 people were wounded, and a teenage girl was killed in a drone strike in Kyiv. Russia's military says it's made gains along Ukraine's eastern Donetsk front, capturing the frontline village of Alexandropol. It comes as citizens in neighbouring Georgia voted to keep a pro-Russian party in power, deepening divisions in a country torn between the West and its old Soviet past. Japanese voters are going to the polls for an election that will determine whether the ruling LDP retains its grip on power. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called the election earlier this month, just 3 days after he took over from his predecessor amid a corruption scandal. The Liberal Democratic Party, which has been in power almost continuously since 1955, has seen its approval rating dip below 20% in recent months. Today's election could see the party lose its majority. Cost of living is front of mind for Japanese voters, as well as concerns about political corruption. There's now just over a week left for the two parties to convince voters to cast their ballot in the US election, and young people are a key target. Previously, they tended to be Democrat supporters, but recent polling suggests a divide. Donald Trump's masculine campaign is striking a chord with young men, while Kamala Harris's stance on abortion rights is being embraced by young women. North America correspondent Carrington Clark reports from North Carolina.
Since 1853, North Carolina's state fair has drawn in the crowds. But even here, you can't totally escape another important contest.
I early voted to ensure that my voice was heard.
One of them's crazy and the other one's ridiculous. I'm not going to say which one's which.
North Carolina's 16 electoral college votes represent a competitively sought-after prize. One of the so-called 7 swing states was to determine this year's election. It's the only in the group won by Donald Trump at the last election, so represents a pick-up opportunity for Kamala Harris this year. To get those necessary votes, Donald Trump has increasingly used non-traditional media to target a specific market, young men, appearing with digital stars, the Nelk Boys, and comedian Theo Von.
No, I would just do cocaine. That was really, yeah.
There were plenty of young men in attendance at this Trump rally in Greenville, North Carolina, including 23-year-old Jack Lawrence.
They want to bring back the masculine face that you saw back in the 60s and 70s with American men. Just strong men providing for their family.
Young Americans usually break heavily for Democrats, but recent polling suggests Trump's hyper-masculine campaign is working to attract Gen Z men across to the Republicans.
To go home.
Kamala Harris is trying to reach young women where they are, including the massive Call Her Daddy podcast.
There are now 20 states with Trump abortion bans.
I think young men are gravitating towards Trump at an astounding degree, and I think that young women are rallying for Kamala Harris.
The Democrats are hoping to encourage enough young women to get to the polls to offset any weakness with young men.
I think that reproductive rights are on the ballot. I think they're rallying to say that we feel like we're losing our autonomy, we feel like our agency is being threatened and challenged, and that is something to vote for, that is something to fight for.
With the race still an effective dead heat, it may be a battle of the sexes that determines the next president of the United States. Carrington Clark, ABC News, North Carolina.
The Greens are calling on the state government to get on with their promise to allow renters the right to have pets. After a state election promise, the Liberal government introduced legislation earlier this year to alter the state's Residential Tenancy Act. Under the proposed changes, landlords must apply to the Tasmanian Civil and Administrative Tribunal to refuse pets. While it's been welcomed by tenancy advocates, critics include the Real Estate Institute of Tasmania and landlord groups. The Greens say the government is stalling.
And it begs the question, well, if the Liberals are not going to bring it on in this power-sharing parliament, we Greens will certainly be prepared to work with our colleagues in the parliament to see what we can do to increase the rights of renters.
There is now further consultation taking place with stakeholders, as you would expect with a major reform of this nature, that you want to get it absolutely right.
Advocates in the deaf community say a chronic lack of qualified TAFE educators is contributing to a national shortage of Auslan interpreters. Fixing the problem was a key recommendation of the Disability Royal Commission, and there's concern it's not being addressed.
We see them on stage at concerts and interpreting vital information on bushfires and pandemics. Brittany Manifest recently joined the ranks of this select few, becoming a certified Auslan interpreter.
When it comes to booking interpreters, you have to book them well in advance, because a lot of the time if you do it last minute, there's not going to be anyone that's available.
On first try, she failed the certification test, which she puts down to a lack of qualified teachers.
We have a national shortage of interpreters, so a lot of the time those are prioritised to be interpreters for the community as opposed to interpreter educators. And you do have them, but again, they're very stretched.
It's people like Drazana Levitsky-Gray who are affected. Auslan is her and her daughter's native language. She needed a skilled interpreter during her daughter's traumatic birth.
You can imagine not having a suitably skilled or compatible interpreter in those very personal, intimate situations that's in the very hard parts of our lives. The information was just being thrown out. Doctors were coming and going, nurses were coming and going.
Ms Levitsky-Gray wants government to invest more in deaf people becoming Auslan educators.
They say we need interpreters, we need more interpreters, we need to reduce the price and cost of the course. Okay, right. But you need to have the right teachers to be able to teach them to become great interpreters.
Over half of people who try to become certified fail the test every year.
It is a hard test, and nobody's really trying to hide the fact that it's a difficult test, because it has a high standard, and it's because it's for the protection of the people who require the service.
The Disability Royal Commission recommended state and territories work to increase the number of interpreters by January 2025. While they've agreed in principle to address the problem, they haven't on a time frame for action. Ruby Littler, ABC News.
As the weather heats up and Australians return to the beach, many swimmers are still haunted by a spate of shark attacks last summer. In South Australia, there were 6 bites in just over 6 months. 3 of them were fatal and all were believed to be from great whites. This year marks 25 years since great white sharks were protected in Australian waters, but the recent spike in attacks has many questioning whether protecting the predator is costing human lives.
The beaches and breaks around the tiny town of Elliston are world class.
The reason that we live out here so far away from everything is because of the surf.
But along with the dolphins and seals, the surfers know they share the waves with something else.
The huge white pointers are unpredictable, terrifying and ferocious monsters.
Great white sharks have always drawn fascination and fear, hunted to the edge of extinction.
She weighed in at 1,000.
In 1999, great whites were declared a protected species.
Simon Bacanello remains missing.
But 2024, the 25th anniversary of that protection, was a grim milestone in South Australia.
Shark attack. A surfer still missing after a suspected encounter.
6 attacks in 8 months, 3 of them fatal. 2 were in the tiny community of Elliston.
The first attack was when we lost Simon.
Teacher Simon Bacanello had just moved to town.
We were surfing with him when he was taken, and that just rocked all of us. He was just so loved at the school. He was just stoked to be here.
As the community grieved, the town experienced a second trauma.
A 64-year-old man is recovering in hospital after the 6th shark attack in South Australian waters in little more than 6 months.
Murray Adams taught alongside Simon at the local school and survived the bite. Now, many are questioning whether protecting great whites is costing human lives.
We started protecting him and then we just left it at that. And sometimes I feel like we as surfers and ocean users are just left as cannon fodder.
In the waters off the Neptune Islands, around 200 kilometres south of Elliston, Flinders University ecologist Charlie Houveniers is trying to better understand great white numbers. He's collecting genetic samples for population modelling.
But the range is actually quite broad, going from about 1,200 to a bit more than 3,000 adult white sharks.
Professor Houveniers says there's no scientific evidence that shark numbers have recovered, and even if they had, it wouldn't explain the recent attacks.
We don't know what happened in South Australia in that summer of 2023-2024. It was an unusual cluster of shark bites, but we're actually seeing these kind of cluster of bites regularly happening, not just in Australia, but across the world.
Houveniers says policies for population recovery need to be matched with appropriate mitigation, arguing that culling sharks is not an effective way to protect swimmers, compared to a range of new technologies like barriers, real-time warning systems, shark deterrents, and drones. In the shadow of newly installed trauma kits, the surfers of Elliston have returned to the ocean that has taken so much.
It's so wild how much the ocean has been imperative to our recovery as well. Yeah, getting back into the water and just that is what getting back to normal life looks like for us too.
A way of life worth saving. Lincoln Rothel, ABC News, Elliston.
To sport, and the Tasmania Jack Jumpers have broken a 3-game NBL losing streak with an 8-point win over the Brisbane Bullets. The reigning champions surrendered an early 19-point lead to be trailing at three-quarter time, but a dominant final 5 minutes saw them take the win 87-79. Mujok Deng and Jordan Crawford top scored for the Jack Jumpers with 16 points each. The team's 3rd win of the season takes it to 8th on the NBL ladder.
At halftime, we said, listen, we've been in this spot now 2 times in a row. What is going to be our response for the next 20 minutes? And I think they just, found a way and made enough stops and made enough plays. And it's not pretty, but it's effective.
The race is on to secure the final two spots of the AFLW final series after the Western Bulldogs pulled off an upset win over Euroke. The Saints left to rue missed opportunities as the Dogs held on in a thrilling 1-point come-from-behind win.
A back-and-forth battle in Ballarat, Saints coach Nick Del Santo aware what was on the line. 2 goals either side of half-time gave the Saints some breathing room.
Squeezed it in! Only took 15 seconds and the Saints have got their fourth.
But the Dogs kicked into gear and the Saints felt the pressure, letting slip 2 late chances.
Less than a minute to play to give her side the lead. She hasn't got the purchase she wants.
The Bulldogs hanging on in a match decided by the barest of margins, ending any chance of the Saints making finals. With the men's premiership coach in the crowd, the women put on a show. Taylor Smith added 3 to her tally.
It's a Lions fiesta in Springfield.
The home side dominating, kicking 11 majors for the match. The Swans couldn't find an answer, goalless for 3 quarters. Brisbane comfortably home and into third on the ladder with a 68-point win. Collingwood has had a disappointing and injury-hit season, but the Pies were out to salvage some pride in a fourth-quarter fight with Carlton.
Collingwood are in front.
But whatever Collingwood did, the Blues did better and secured the 4-point win.
Flying pin!
Dreamtime in Darwin was a headline act even before the first bounce. And once the footy started, the spectacle only got better. Essendon was looking good, leading for most of the second half.
It's Georgia G. Bombers out to a game-high 11-point lead.
The Tigers refusing to go away, and with 75 seconds left on the clock, the skipper stepped up.
It's soccer through.
All square in a thrilling and frantic finish. The Bombers are now at risk of falling out of the 8, and both sides were left dealing with serious injuries. Essendon ruck Steph Wells hurting her knee. Tigers forward Sarah Hoskins her hamstring. Alexia Pesce, ABC News.
Supercars Championship leader Will Brown will take a crucial points buffer into the final stop of the season after finishing on the podium at the Gold Coast 500. The second race of the weekend started with carnage as 8 cars were involved in a pile-up calling for the safety car. Bathurst winner Brodie Kostecki was unfazed as he made the most of pole position to secure his second win of the year. Will Brown finished runner-up, followed by Brock Feeney, who'll be his only challenger for the championship title, which will be decided in Adelaide. To the weather, and tonight's photo is from Robert Cassidy of Ben Lomond's Stacks Bluff. It is Tasmania's 9th highest mountain. It was mostly a cloudy day today with plenty of low and high level cloud. A few isolated light showers fell about the west and south. The top temperature was 23 degrees at Hobart Airport, Bushy Park and Campania. It reached 21 in Launceston and 23 in Hobart. Yesterday and overnight, the highest rainfall was 9 millimetres at Mount Bobs, followed by 7 millimetres at Misery Plateau, Razorback and Scotts Peak. 1 millimetre fell at Mount Reid. The national satellite sequence shows patchy low-level cloud over most of the state except the northeast. A high cloud band moves over the state from west to east. And tomorrow's synoptic chart shows a high over southeast Queensland. Another high sits over the top of the Bight and ridges over the whole southern coastline of Australia. Across the country tomorrow, wet in Darwin, Cairns and Brisbane. 25 in Sydney, 32 in Perth. Back home, and there'll be showers about the west and far south, contracting to the west in the afternoon, mainly fine elsewhere. 14 for Strawn and Queenstown tomorrow, 16 in Burnie, 20 in Launceston. Moving eastward, 18 in St Helens, 19 in Swansea, 17 in Orford, windy and 13 in Oatlands. Partly cloudy for Hobart, a slight chance of a shower with possible small hail in the morning, a low of 9 degrees and a top of 17. Sunrise tomorrow will be at 5:58. On coastal waters, west to southwesterly winds at 20 to 30 knots, reaching up to 35 knots about the southeast and lower east in the afternoon and early evening. There's a gale warning for the lower east coast and southeast coast, and there's a strong wind warning for the rest of the state. There's a warning to sheep graziers for the Midlands, Upper Derwent Valley and the southeast. The outlook for Tuesday, showers about the west, fine elsewhere, westerly winds. The outlook for Wednesday: showers about the west and far south, fine elsewhere with westerly winds. And the 7-day outlook is showing some fine days ahead, as well as some with showers. And that's the news for now. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.